We have a warrant to search this property. Step aside.
Okay, then show me the warrant.
We don't have to show you anything. We're executing a lawful search.
Actually, under the Fourth Amendment, you're required to present the warrant before entry.
And conducting a warrantless search is a constitutional violation. That's the law.
At exactly 7:15 a.m. on a Saturday morning in Philadelphia, 3 police officers believed they were about to carry out a simple, routine drug raid. To them, it was just another door, another search, another case. What they had no idea about was that they had just knocked on the door of a woman who had already sent 14 corrupt police officers to federal prison over the last 3 years. The woman standing in that doorway was not scared of badges, uniforms, or threats. She wasn't someone who could be pushed around. In fact, she understood power far better than they did. She knew the law better than their entire department combined. And over the next 23 minutes, she was going to tear apart everything they believed about getting away with illegal searches. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your country or state in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that button now, because this story is about to get absolutely crazy. Jasmine Carter was not your average 29-year-old black woman. While most people her age were still trying to pay off student loans and figure out what they wanted to do with their lives, Jasmine had already become one of the most feared federal prosecutors in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. She wasn't just good at her job, she was legendary. Growing up, Jasmine had watched her father get pulled over again and again for no reason other than driving while black. Those experiences stayed with her. She knew what it felt like to see people in authority misuse their power. Because of that, she decided at a young age that she would become someone who could fight back using the law itself. Jasmine graduated from Stanford Law School with honors. After that, she clerked for a federal appellate judge who focused on criminal procedure. Then she made a decision that many young lawyers thought would ruin her career. She turned down high-paying jobs at major law firms and instead took a position at the U.S. Attorney's Office, earning far less money. Why would she do that? Because Jasmine had no interest in defending big corporations. She wanted to prosecute criminals, and more specifically, she wanted to prosecute criminals who wore badges. She joined the Public Corruption Unit, a special division that investigated government officials who abused their power. For the past 3 years, Jasmine had focused almost entirely on police misconduct, civil rights violations, illegal searches, planting evidence, using excessive force, lying under oath. The cases that made other prosecutors nervous were the ones Jasmine went after without hesitation. She had an 87% conviction rate, something almost unheard of in public corruption cases. By that point, she had helped secure prison sentences totaling more than 200 years for officers who believed they were untouchable. She had testified before Congress about police accountability. She had written a law review article that changed how federal courts looked at qualified immunity defenses. Defense attorneys couldn't stand her. Police unions labeled her biased and anti-cop. Internal affairs units both feared and respected her, because when Jasmine Carter opened an investigation, people ended up behind bars. But what truly made Jasmine dangerous to corrupt officers was not just her knowledge of criminal and constitutional law. She understood police procedure better than most cops themselves. She had spent hundreds of hours riding along with officers, watching how they operated, learning their habits, and understanding their culture. She had reviewed thousands of police reports, body camera recordings, and arrest files. She could spot a fake warrant application instantly. She noticed Fourth Amendment violations that other prosecutors completely missed. She knew the difference between honest police work and criminals hiding behind badges. Jasmine specialized in one specific type of case: illegal searches based on false or completely fake warrants. Some officers used this trick to make arrests and seize property without doing the real work of proving probable cause. They would either lie on warrant applications or search homes without warrants, and later claim exigent circumstances that never actually existed. In the past 2 years alone, Jasmine had prosecuted 11 cases involving warrant fraud. She had won every single one. When officers lied on warrant applications and Jasmine Carter was handling the case, federal prison was the outcome. And on that Saturday morning, 3 officers from the Philadelphia Police Department's narcotics unit were about to learn exactly why. Jasmine lived in a converted warehouse located in a neighborhood that was still changing. 20 years earlier, the area had been mostly industrial. Now it was slowly filling up with artists, young professionals, and small local businesses. Jasmine had bought the place 3 years earlier because she liked the open space, and the location made it easy for her to get to the federal courthouse. The building had 2 units. Jasmine lived in the upstairs loft, The downstairs unit was rented by a graphic designer named James Torres. James was 31 years old and originally from Puerto Rico. He was quiet, kept to himself, paid his rent on time, and stayed out of everyone's business. Jasmine didn't really know him that well. They would exchange quick greetings whenever they passed each other in the hallway. Once, he helped her carry groceries up the stairs. Another time, she signed for a package when he wasn't home. Just normal neighbor interactions, nothing more. What Jasmine definitely didn't know was that James had a brother who was involved in drug dealing. Not James himself. James was completely clean, but his brother Carlos had gotten himself into trouble. The Philadelphia Police Department's narcotics unit had been investigating Carlos for months. The officers had been watching Carlos closely. They tracked his movements and followed him, hoping to build a solid case. During that surveillance, they noticed Carlos visit the building where James lived. They saw him walk inside and leave about 20 minutes later carrying a gym bag. That single visit was enough for them to jump to conclusions. In their minds, it meant drugs were being stored somewhere in that building. They didn't know which unit. They didn't have proof of drugs. They only had an assumption based on one visit by someone they suspected was a dealer. So they did what they had done many times before. They wrote a warrant application filled with exaggerations and guesses presented as facts. They claimed they had information from a reliable confidential informant, even though they didn't. They said they had seen multiple suspicious visits when they had actually seen only one. They claimed they had evidence of drug activity at that address, even though no such evidence existed. They submitted the application to a magistrate judge late Friday afternoon. It was the time when judges were rushing through paperwork, trying to finish up and head home for the weekend. The judge didn't read the application carefully and signed the warrant. The warrant covered the entire building, both units. This was despite the fact that the officers only suspected activity in one unit and didn't even know which one it was. That Saturday morning, officers Derek Mullins, Chris Santos, and Rebecca Walsh arrived to carry out the warrant. Derek was the lead officer. He was 42 years old and had been on the force for 15 years. Chris and Rebecca were younger and less experienced, and they followed Derek's lead without question. Derek had already been investigated twice before for questionable search tactics. Both times, Internal Affairs cleared him, not because he was innocent, but because the cases were closed before anyone looked too deeply into them. At exactly 7:15 a.m., they knocked on the main door. Jasmine was already awake. She had gone for a run, taken a shower, and was making coffee when she heard the loud pounding. She walked to the door wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, her hair still wet. Through the small window in the door, her brown skin was clearly visible. She could see 3 people standing outside in tactical gear with the word police printed across their vests. Jasmine opened the door with the safety chain still attached. Derek Mullen saw a young black woman dressed casually and immediately made the first of many assumptions he would regret that morning. Derek told her they had a warrant and ordered her to step aside. Jasmine's response was instant and exact. She demanded to see the warrant. She didn't ask. She demanded it. Derek tried to pull an authority move. He told her they didn't have to show her anything. That was a lie, and Jasmine knew it immediately. She cited the Fourth Amendment and explained that officers were required to present a warrant before entering. This wasn't legal theory from law school. This was settled constitutional law. Any officer who had gone through basic training should have known it. Derek escalated the situation. He accused her of interfering and said it was a crime. He was trying to scare her into backing down by threatening arrest. But Jasmine didn't back down. She calmly pointed out that what he was doing was a constitutional violation that could easily lead to a lawsuit. Then she asked the question again, the one question Derek couldn't avoid. Instead of answering, Derek made his biggest mistake. He challenged her authority. He demanded to know who she thought she was.
We have a warrant to search this property.
Jasmine told him exactly who she was. An assistant United States attorney who prosecuted corrupt police officers for a living. Then she told him something that should have made all 3 officers turn around immediately and call their supervisor. She said that if they entered without presenting a valid warrant, she would have federal charges filed against them by Monday morning. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, backed by the full power of the United States Department of Justice. Quick question for you watching. Have you ever wondered what happens when police come face to face with someone who actually has the power to prosecute them? Drop a comment below. Derek froze. He looked over at Chris and Rebecca. You could see the calculation happening in his head. Were they really going to walk away from a search just because someone was challenging them? Derek pulled a folded document from his pocket and held it up so Jasmine could see it through the gap in the door. Jasmine told him to slide it under the door so she could read it properly. Derek hesitated, then complied. Jasmine picked up the document and read it carefully. Every single line. The officers stood silently in the hallway as she read. It took her about 2 minutes. 2 minutes spent analyzing every word, every date, and every claim of probable cause listed in the warrant. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed. She wasn't just defending her rights anymore. She was looking at evidence of a crime. Jasmine opened the door fully and stepped into the hallway, holding the warrant in her hand. She began asking questions that made Derek's face turn pale. She asked who the confidential informant was that had supposedly provided information about drug activity at that address. Derek said he couldn't reveal that. Jasmine nodded and said that was fine. Jasmine told him that was fine. If needed, she would subpoena the confidential informant's identity in federal court. Both of them knew exactly what would happen then, because no such informant actually existed. Next, she asked about the multiple controlled drug buys the warrant claimed had taken place at that location. She asked for the dates, the times, and the amounts involved. Derek said that information was in the case file. Jasmine calmly told him she wanted the case number so she could review it herself. Derek gave her a number. She then asked which unit they were planning to search. Derek answered that they were searching both units. Jasmine asked why both units were included when they had no specific information pointing to either one. Derek repeated that the warrant covered the entire building. Jasmine immediately pointed out the problem. A warrant must clearly describe the exact place to be searched. Searching an entire building when officers only had suspicion about one unknown unit was considered a general warrant, something the Fourth Amendment clearly forbids. Derek was sweating now, not because it was hot, but because the pressure was closing in on him. Jasmine asked one more question. She asked if the magistrate judge who signed the warrant was Judge Patricia Morrison. Derek checked the document and confirmed that it was. Jasmine smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. She told the officers that she knew Judge Morrison personally. She explained that Judge Morrison was extremely careful with warrant applications and would never approve something this sloppy unless the facts had been misrepresented to her. Jasmine told them that she would be visiting Judge Morrison first thing Monday morning. She said she would be bringing this warrant with her, asking very specific questions about what information had been presented. Then, Jasmine asked the question that ended everything. She asked if this warrant had been obtained by Detective Derek Mullins. Derek confirmed that he was Derek Mullins. Jasmine followed up by asking if he was the same Derek Mullins who had been investigated twice by Internal Affairs for questionable search warrants. The silence in the hallway was heavy. No one spoke. Jasmine told them they now had two choices. They could walk away immediately. If they did, she would file a complaint with their department and with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and there would be an investigation. Or they could try to execute a warrant that was clearly defective. If they chose that option, Jasmine said she would personally make sure federal criminal charges were filed for deprivation of rights under color of law, a charge that carried a possible sentence of up to 10 years in prison. She told them to choose carefully and to choose quickly. Chris and Rebecca looked at Derek. Derek looked at the warrant in Jasmine's hands. Then he looked past her at the door behind her, knowing that whatever they might find inside would never be worth federal prison. For the first, and possibly only, smart decision he made that morning, Derek told his team they were leaving. Jasmine told him she would be keeping the original warrant as evidence. Derek tried to argue, saying they needed it. Jasmine reminded him that as a federal prosecutor, she was seizing it as evidence of a possible federal crime. She suggested that his sergeant contact her office if he had any questions about that decision. The three officers left. Jasmine closed the door, went back inside, and immediately made a phone call to her supervisor at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Then she made a second call to the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force. Then she made a third call to Internal Affairs at the Philadelphia Police Department. By 8 a.m., 3 separate investigations had been opened into Derek Mullins and his warrant application. By Monday morning, Derek was placed on administrative leave. His warrant applications from the past 2 years were pulled and reviewed by a team of federal agents and prosecutors. By Wednesday, FBI agents interviewed Judge Morrison. She was furious when she learned how her trust had been used. She gave a detailed statement explaining what Derek had told her compared to what was actually in the warrant application. By Friday, Derek Mullins was arrested on federal charges. He faced 2 counts of deprivation of rights under color of law and 1 count of perjury in a warrant application. Each charge carried a possible 10-year sentence. Chris Santos and Rebecca Walsh were not charged criminally, but both were suspended while the investigation continued. They eventually resigned before it was completed. The investigation
warrant to
didn't
search this
stop with
property.
Derek.
Step aside.
Federal agents
Okay, and
began
show me the
reviewing
warrant.
every
don't have to
warrant
show you anything. We're
application from the
executing a lawful
narcotics
search.
unit over the past 3
Actually, under the
years.
Fourth
What they
Amendment,
found
you're
showed a
required to
clear
present the
pattern.
warrant before entry.
Exaggerated
Conducting a
claims of
warrantless search
probable
is a
cause,
constitutional
fake
violation.
confidential
That's the law.
informants, vague descriptions of criminal activity. General warrants that violated the requirement for specific searches. They identified 27 warrants with problems similar to the one Derek tried to use at Jasmine's building. That meant 27 potentially illegal searches, 27 cases that may have involved constitutional violation. Quick question for you watching. Do you think entire police units should be held accountable when patterns like this are uncovered? Share your thoughts in the comments. Jasmine was assigned as the lead prosecutor on the case. She removed herself as a witness since she had been directly involved, but she was still allowed to prosecute the broader pattern of misconduct uncovered by the investigation. The case took 9 months to build. Jasmine's team interviewed dozens of people whose homes had been searched by Derek's unit. They reviewed hundreds of warrant applications. They identified 12 additional officers connected to the questionable warrants. The investigation expanded far beyond Derek Mullins. The entire narcotics unit came under scrutiny. The unit supervisor, Lieutenant Thomas Brennan, was found to have approved many of the problematic warrants without proper review. He was charged as well. Derek went to trial. He claimed he had acted in good faith. He said he truly believed there was probable cause and that any mistakes were honest errors. Jasmine dismantled that defense step by step. She showed the jury 12 different warrant applications where Derek used nearly identical language to describe different confidential informants who likely didn't exist. She showed how Derek's warrants were almost always approved on Friday afternoons, when judges were rushed and overloaded. She showed a clear pattern of targets, being mostly Black and Latino residents in certain neighborhoods. She called witnesses who described how Derek's team entered their homes, found nothing, and left without explanation or apology. Most of those witnesses were Black and Latino residents from neighborhoods the unit targeted heavily. She also called a retired magistrate judge, who explained exactly how judges review warrant applications and how Derek's false statements corrupted that process. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Derek Mullins guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, and his conviction made headlines across Philadelphia. The U.S. attorney later held a press conference about the case. During it, she clearly stated that the investigation had started because one of her own prosecutors had personally witnessed an attempted illegal search. Media coverage quickly identified Jasmine as that prosecutor. Within 24 hours, Jasmine began receiving death threats from police supporters. Many of them were openly racist, attacking her as a Black woman who dared to prosecute white officers. At the same time, she also received hundreds of emails thanking her. Many came from Black and brown families who had experienced similar illegal searches and finally felt seen. The investigation into the narcotics unit continued. 3 more officers were charged federally. 8 others were fired by the department. Lieutenant Brennan pleaded guilty to conspiracy to violate civil rights and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The Philadelphia Police Department was forced to make major changes. Every warrant application now had to be reviewed by a legal advisor before being submitted. All officers were required to complete a 40-hour course on Fourth Amendment rules. Body cameras became mandatory for all search warrant executions. An outside auditor was hired to review warrant applications every 3 months. The district attorney's office reviewed all 27 cases where illegal warrants had been used. Charges were dismissed in 19 of them. 5 people who had already been convicted were released from prison after their convictions were overturned. The city faced a wave of civil rights lawsuits from people who had been illegally searched. The settlements added up to more than $18 million. The insurance company covering the police department even threatened to drop coverage unless serious reforms were made. All of this happened because Jasmine Carter refused to step aside when 3 officers showed up at her door with a defective warrant. Now let's look at the bigger picture. This story isn't just about one prosecutor stopping one illegal search. It's about what happens when someone with real authority challenges police officers who are used to never being questioned. Most people don't know their rights when police arrive with a warrant. They don't know that officers must show the warrant before entering. They don't understand what probable cause really means. They don't know they can read the warrant carefully and ask questions. They don't know how to spot a defective warrant. Many officers rely on that lack of knowledge. Not all officers, but enough that it becomes a systemic problem. Officers like Derek Mullins were able to use sloppy, questionable, and sometimes dishonest warrants for years because no one pushed back effectively. But Jasmine was not a typical citizen. She was a federal prosecutor who specialized in exactly this kind of misconduct. She knew which questions to ask. She knew the warning signs. She knew how to read a warrant application and identify lies. More importantly, she had the power to act. When she said she would file federal charges, it wasn't an empty threat. It was a promise backed by the full authority of the Department of Justice. This case also exposed a deeper problem in police culture.
And show me the warrant.
Derek Mullins had been investigated twice before. Both times he was cleared, not because he was innocent, but because the system protected him. Internal affairs investigations into police misconduct result in discipline far less often than criminal cases against civilians. Why? Because police investigate police. Because departments often care more about protecting their own than holding them accountable. Because loyalty is often valued over integrity. It took a federal investigation led by someone outside that culture to finally hold Derek accountable. And even then, it only happened because he made the mistake of targeting someone who could fight back. Here's a question for you. Should all police misconduct investigations be handled by outside agencies instead of internal affairs? Share your thoughts in the comments. The body camera footage from Derek's team that morning later became key evidence. It showed Derek's aggressive behavior. It captured his refusal to show the warrant. It recorded the moment Jasmine identified herself as a federal prosecutor. It even showed Derek's expression when he realized he had just tried to carry out a questionable warrant on someone who could end his career. That footage was later shown to every officer in the Philadelphia Police Department during mandatory training. The video was titled Constitutional Requirements for Search Warrants, a Case Study. It was meant to teach two clear lessons. First, know the law and follow it. Second, never assume the person you're dealing with doesn't know their rights. If you cut corners, you will eventually be caught. Jasmine continued her work at the U.S. Attorney's Office. After the Mullins case, her workload increased sharply. Victims of police misconduct now knew there was a prosecutor who would actually pursue these cases seriously. Since then, she has prosecuted 23 additional officers for different forms of corruption. Her conviction rate has stayed above 85%. She has expanded her focus to include excessive force cases and evidence planting. She still lives in the same warehouse loft. The downstairs unit is now rented by a teacher. Jasmine made sure her new neighbor knew what had happened before and assured her that nothing like that would ever happen again. James Torres, the original downstairs tenant, moved out shortly after the incident. It wasn't because of anything Jasmine did. He was simply afraid that his brother's problems might continue to affect him. Jasmine helped him end his lease early and even wrote a reference letter for his new apartment. Derek Mullins is currently serving his sentence at a federal prison in Pennsylvania. He will be eligible for release in 2029. His law enforcement career is over. His pension was taken away. His reputation is ruined. Lieutenant Thomas Brennan is also in federal prison. The unit he supervised was disbanded. Officers who were not charged were reassigned to other divisions. The three officers who arrived at Jasmine's door that morning made very different career choices. Derek continued corrupt practices and ended up in prison. Chris Santos became a private investigator. Rebecca Walsh left law enforcement altogether and now works in social services. There's one more issue raised by coverage of this case. Some people argued that Jasmine should have allowed the search to happen and filed a complaint afterward. They said confronting armed police officers was dangerous and could have gone badly. Here's the truth. Jasmine had every legal right to demand to see the warrant before allowing entry. That wasn't confrontation. That was constitutional law. The Fourth Amendment clearly requires warrants to be specific, and courts have repeatedly ruled that the warrant must be shown to the person whose property is being searched. As for the danger, Jasmine fully understood the risk. As a black woman, she knew confrontations with police carried extra danger. She had prosecuted cases where such confrontations turned violent, especially against people who looked like her. She knew that asserting your rights while black can be life-threatening. But she also understood something else. If she, a black federal prosecutor with legal knowledge and institutional power, didn't assert those rights, then ordinary black citizens had no chance at all. Someone with her position had a responsibility to push back. She correctly calculated that once she identified herself as a federal prosecutor specializing in police corruption, the officers would realize that harming her would bring consequences they could not escape. Not everyone has that protection. And that is exactly the problem Jasmine is trying to fix through her work. So, what are the lessons here? First, know your rights when it comes to search warrants. Police must show you the warrant before entering. You have the right to read it carefully. You have the right to check that it is properly signed and dated. You have the right to ask questions. You have the right to check whether the warrant clearly lists your address and exactly what officers are searching for. You should never interfere with the search, but you should document everything. Second, stay calm and do not offer information voluntarily. Jasmine asked clear, focused questions. She didn't argue emotionally. She didn't overshare. She stayed in control by using knowledge and staying composed. Third, document everything. If police carry out a search warrant, take photos of any damage. Keep copies of all paperwork. Write down the names and badge numbers of every officer present. As soon as possible, record exactly what happened while it's still fresh in your mind. Fourth, get legal help immediately. If you believe a search was illegal, contact an attorney right away. There are strict deadlines for challenging searches and preserving evidence, and waiting too long can cost you your case. Fifth, understand that accountability is possible, but only if you follow through. Jasmine didn't just stop an illegal search. She filed complaints with 3 different agencies. She cooperated fully with investigators. She prosecuted the case, and she stayed with it until the end. That follow-through is what created real change. As of now, Derek Mullins still has 7 years left on his sentence. He filed an appeal, arguing that his conviction was unfair, because the prosecutor had been personally involved in the incident. The appeal was denied. Jasmine Carter was promoted to senior trial attorney in the public correction unit. She now supervises other prosecutors who handle police misconduct cases. She has trained FBI agents on how to identify warrant fraud. She also lectures at law schools about federal prosecutions involving civil rights violations. The Philadelphia Police Department continues to operate under a consent decree that requires outside review of warrant applications. Compliance has been uneven. Some officers support the reforms. Others resist them. Audits still find problems, though they are not as severe as they were during the Derek Mullins era. None of these changes would have happened if Jasmine had stepped aside that Saturday morning. None of them would have happened if she had allowed the illegal search and filed a complaint later. And none of them would have happened if she hadn't known her rights and had the power to enforce them. One prosecutor, one illegal warrant, 23 minutes at her front door, and an entire police unit was dismantled. That is the power of knowledge combined with institutional authority. That is what accountability looks like when someone with the ability to enforce it refuses to look away. That is what happens when corrupt officers finally face someone they cannot intimidate. Final question for you. What is one thing you learned from this story that you didn't know before? Share your answer in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. This story matters because it shows how police corruption usually operates. Not through dramatic, movie-style crimes, but through everyday shortcuts and assumptions that no one will push back. Through warrant applications that stretch the truth because judges are busy and don't always have time to examine them closely. Through supervisors who approve questionable actions because challenging officers feels uncomfortable. Jasmine's story proves that these systems can be challenged, that corrupt officers can be prosecuted, that entire units can be held accountable when patterns of misconduct are exposed, and that real change is possible when someone with knowledge and authority refuses to accept business as usual. Not every illegal search gets stopped. Not every corrupt officer goes to prison. Not every victim gets justice. But this one did, and that matters. The warrant application Derek Mullins submitted that Friday afternoon is now used in law schools as an example of probable cause fraud. Students can clearly see where he claimed facts that didn't exist. They can see where he exaggerated suspicious activity. They can see exactly what warrant fraud looks like. And maybe, just maybe, the next time an officer thinks about cutting corners on a warrant application, they will remember this case. They will remember Derek Mullins serving 8 years in federal prison. They will remember that the person whose door they knock on might know the law better than they do. That is Jasmine Carter's legacy. Not just prosecuting one corrupt officer, but proving that the system can work when people with power use it responsibly. That accountability is real when someone enforces it. That rights matter when someone defends them. This is the story of how an assistant United States attorney turned an attempted illegal search into federal prison sentences for multiple officers and systemic reform across an entire police department. But more than that, it's a story about courage, knowledge, and the ongoing fight against corruption in law enforcement. Thank you for watching this story all the way through. If you found it eye-opening, make sure you're subscribed, because I share more stories like this that need to be told. Drop a comment and let me know what you think should happen in cases like these. See you in the next one.